me up. Hello everybody, today we're doing a ceiling patch. I also made a previous video like this but with no dialogue, and then someone left me a comment saying you need to put dialogue on because obviously some people need to be told what to do instead of just watching how easy it is to do. So basically this is the same video but with dialogue. I'm not going to go through the whole video talking for 30 minutes straight. I'm just going to go over the basics, what we're doing here. Basically, they had water damage ceiling from a roof or a pipe above this small area, like a 2 foot by 2 foot area that we have to cut out. Also, the texture is kind of peeling past the area. It's not really terrible, so we're just going to refinish that. And then also the ceiling above, probably a long time ago, this had the same problem, and they patched this area in before, but they did a bad texture job. So we're going to skim out the whole area and just do a new spray knockdown texture. But first things first, especially on ceiling jobs that involve spray texture, you just want to mask off everything, the walls, the floor, get everything sealed up so you can cut out the area. Once you get it all masked off, then like this one is such a small patch, we're just going to use a piece of sheetrock as a template. Small piece like this, under 2 foot by 2 foot. So we're just going to take the piece of sheetrock, put it against the damage, and pencil out the area to get our template. It's easier than trying to measure it out both sides, up and down. So sometimes this template method works easier for smaller stuff. Of course, a patch is really big. You just want to measure it maybe from the angle out on each side and then just pencil it with the straight edge. He's going to use a Sawzall cutout. Easy Sawzall technique works. A little bit of peeling went past the damage area, so I'm just going to scrape it with this 6. If you want, you could cut out a large area, but if I cut out all this little area, it'd be almost a half a sheet or more of sheetrock, and the job just calls for just cutting out the damaged area. So little stuff like this that's just peeling, no big deal. You can literally scrape it off, and if need be, tape over it, mud over it, and texture, and it'll look good as new. Obviously, you always cut out any sheetrock that's really damaged, dipping down, sagging, stuff like that. The other stuff's just peeling, no big deal. We're going to mud over it to clean up the texture, clean up the whole area. Once you get all your nails pulled, everything pulled, if you cut your patch back center to center on the actual studs, then you wouldn't need backing. But more than likely, you're going to have to add backing. Backing just as pieces of wood. You can use a 2x4, 1x2. You could even use those metal drywall clips, which some people love to use, but I don't like using them. So I just use wood. 1x2s always work. 2x2s, 2x4s. You just want to go a little longer than the actual patch itself with your backing if you want to do whole pieces. Also, if you're able, put screws on your outside edge of your old studs around the patch to tighten up the old sheetrock, especially when you're cutting out stuff like that and it gets loose. So you want to tighten up the area around if possible. Of course, these screws that you put further out, you're going to have to mud over. But since we're mudding this whole area and texturing it, no big deal. Since you got the area all cut out and you get your backing in, your new piece of sheetrock that you used as a template should fit in nicely. If it doesn't fit in nicely, then of course cut back the old sheetrock a little more until it fits into place. You just basically made a new patch without having to measure anything, just by using a piece of scrap sheetrock that you might have on hand. Of course, if the area is bigger, then you want to of course cut out more and more, whatever you want to do to make the job look correctly. Once you get the patch all hung, make sure you add plenty of screws. We like to do screws every 3 inches or so. Plenty of screws, just make everything nice and tight. I went and did a job the other day and they only put 1 screw in a patch. That's not enough. You need to tighten up all sides if possible. At least both sides of the patch need wood backing. The ideal world, all 4 sides have backing and nice and tight. Once you get your patch all screwed up and all your screw heads are in, not sticking out, you don't want no screw heads sticking out, use your 6-inch knife and scrape your patchwork. Anything that you're going to put tape over, you want to always scrape prior, just to get the goobers and the gunk out of it, any loose stuff. That way the tape sits nicely across the lines. A lot of people think you could just mud over a patch. I'm sure if you just mud it over, it might or might not crack, but you always want to use fiberglass mesh tape. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of conversations on YouTube about what type of tapes to use for drywall. I'm going to tell you this, fiberglass mesh tape that you can get at any home improvement store. The fiberglass itself is a good, strong material. If you're in doubt about using fiberglass, sometimes you can go through and pre-fill your gaps and then stick your fiberglass to it. But I've never had any callbacks, recracks, anything like that using fiberglass mesh tape. With that said, I'm not going to go out and experiment with all these newer tapes that keep coming out every other year. So I stick to a fiberglass mesh tape for all my repair works. You're going to notice that he's using a spray glue. Leaves a pink. It's like a corner bead drywall spray glue, or you can just use a regular spray glue. This is optional product. The only reason we're using a spray glue is because the patch is on the ceiling, and the fiberglass has a sticky to it, but the stickiness likes to stick to new drywall. It doesn't like to stick to old sheetrock, dusty sheetrock. So we just do a light coat of this spray glue. It's not there really to do much except keep the tape in place, especially on the ceiling, so it doesn't fold or fall down on us. Nothing's worse than getting everything fiberglass mesh taped on a ceiling, and then you turn around to go get your mud. You got mud pan in one hand, knife in another, and then all your tape is falling down, and then you're working with quickset mud. You have to put everything down, put the tape back up. So we just like to tack in the tape just to get the tape pushed in really good. It gets in the crevices. And this also does give it a little bonding strength. I know we spray this spray glue like on really dusty stuff that we can't de-dust, or some water damaged stuff that peels, and it gives it a good bond for the mud. But we're not saturating it with this spray glue. It's just a little quick spray. This one is a red tint because it's used for installing like corner bead, plastic bead, drywall corner beads. So they put a reddish pinkish tint to it, which I don't like. So, but it just shows you where the spray glue is. Any other damages, peeling areas, cracks, stuff like that go past your patch area, you want a fiberglass. Everything that doesn't look right, just put some fiberglass on it. If something's peeling, it doesn't look right, just put a piece of fiberglass over it. Once you mud over that and texture it, it'll be good as new. And then you have the peace of mind that knowing that you put a piece of fiberglass over it before you mudded it. That way it's all sealed up. Like to the right of this patch, the little buckled area, this was an actual tape seam that someone did themselves and they didn't do it correctly. So it was blistered because they used a paper tape. So we dug out their old paper tape and they left a gap. So we're going to actually do fiberglass mesh over the area that they used a paper tape on before. Easy enough. Get everything fiberglassed. You don't need to go out and buy paper tape, buy this infusion tape, this other type of tape. Just buy a roll of regular fiberglass mesh tape. I've seen rolls vary in price anywhere from $6 to $12. So you might just need a small roll for your project. And don't buy your fiberglass tape. I've seen it. They sell it at the dollar store. Don't buy that cheap stuff. Buy it from name brand stuff at the home improvement stores. I actually get mine from a drywall supplier that's by me, and this is a more heavier grade fiberglass that's also used for stucco, styrofoam, and drywall, so it's a little thicker than the thin fiberglass. So that's probably why I never have any issues with it, because it's a thicker fiberglass. It's not the thin fiberglass. Once you get everything taped up, everything looks good, fiberglass everything, double check everything, because your next step, you're going to be mudding. So once you start mudding, you're putting all your hanging tools away, all your fiberglass and everything. You're going to get everything coated out. Here I'm using a 5-minute mud because I got to blow out the whole area. Like I said, we're going to coat out the whole area, and we're going to coat over our patch. The reason I'm using a 5-minute mud because I have to finish this job in one trip. If you've never mudded before, just use a regular all-purpose joint compound. Joint compounds are perfect to work with because you just put the mud on, you let them dry, then you sand away your mistakes. I'm using a quick set hot mud, 5 minutes. So when this stuff sets up, it really sets up almost like a cement. So you need to kind of know what you're doing if you're going to work with hot muds. I know everybody's always in a hurry to get the job done right now. The only reason I use hot muds is because I have to finish the job. In the ideal world, you would just use a joint compound and come back the next day, sand it, put another coat on, let it dry, sand it. So that way you don't have to mix up hot muds and make any mistakes with hot muds. With joint compounds, if you make a mistake, you can sand away your mistake. If you make a really big mistake with joint compounds, you can even probably wet the material really good with a wet sponge over and over and scrape away your mud after you soften it up. So joint compounds are easier to work with, especially for a newbie. If you're more of a professional mudder, you've mudded more than a dozen times, then go ahead and use a hot mud. Once you get these hot muds, they start to set up. Like this is a 5-minute mud, it's literally setting up in 5 minutes. So before it really sets up, you have to slick it out. This technique has to be done with all hot muds. All 5s, all 20s, all 40s, all 90-minute hot muds have to be slicked out before they set up. You don't just coat the mud and walk away and call it a day. You have to slick out before you're finished with the job. You can't walk away with hot muds until after you slick them out. The reason you slick it out is because the material is going to set up almost like a cement. I would compare working with hot muds as like working with a cement or like a clay, where the material starts to set up and you manipulate it as it's setting up. Once it sets up, that's it. That you get what you bought. I know on the bag it says easy sand, but you do not want to have to sand hot muds because you're going to be trying to sand cement. It's a strong material, the strongest stuff on the market. So when it sets up, it really sets up. They call it a hot mud because it chemically sets up. Once you add the water, it's going to activate it, and you got to work time to work with it. So if you are going to use a hot mud, I don't recommend you using 5-minute muds unless you're doing like a small patch under 2x2, because you got to really know what you're doing, work with it, get your tools cleaned up, get back in there and slick it out before it starts setting up. Slicking out in this technique takes years and jobs of practice to get the hang of it, know what you're doing. I'm sure you think you go watch this YouTube video and you think you can do a patch yourself. You probably can, but how's it gonna look? So just stick to your joint compounds and you won't have as many mistakes like you would using a hot mud, quick set hot mud like this.
this now.
Once you get it all slicked out or sanded out, you're going to have to always do a second coat. We did a nice slick out technique, so slicking it out sometimes counts as a second coat. It almost looks good, ready to texture, but I'm going to follow through and do a tight second coat, skim coat over everything, just to fill in any imperfections, any blemishes, any deep spots. That's what your second or third coat's going to be doing. The first coat's more of a fill-in. Second coat's just going to get rid of any chatters, goobers. So that's why I'm just doing a tight second coat. Everybody always thinks you put the mud on heavy. You don't put mud on heavy. You're not trying to blow out stuff. You're not some mudding genius that can blow out stuff really heavy to fill in. Just put coats on tight. It's always easier to add another coat, second, third, or even a fourth coat tight than it is to try to get rid of something that you humped out because you put too much mud on. So you just use the mud as you need it. Tight coats, more coats are better than less coats, heavier coats. Because especially with hot muds, they don't shrink back. Everybody thinks you put mud on heavy. On a joint compound, maybe you leave it a little heavy because it is going to shrink back the next day. But sometimes when you put the mud on too heavy, you're going to leave a crown or dip, or you're going to see the patch area because you built up the material too much. I would compare mudding like trying to fix a ding or dang on a car where you're trying to do Bondo. You're not just going to put a gallon of Bondo on a dent. You're going to just fill in the area that's needed. And then if need be, you do another tight coat over it. You're just filling in the dings and the dangs. That's all patchwork really is. You're not trying to blow out everything, make a big old hump on it. Just smearing mud's all you're doing really when you're doing that. So you're just kind of putting the mud where it's needed, feathering it out, and if need be, do another tight coat. Just like I'm doing here. I'm doing a tight coat with a 5-minute. And just filling in everything. And some guys even like to go the opposite direction of their first coat. So if you go horizontal, then you go diagonal or whatever, opposite direction. Some guys like to do that, or you can follow the pattern that you did with the first coat. Doesn't really matter. As long as you slick out or you sand it between coats, it's going to fill in the same. Now that the 5-minute mud's set up, I'm going to do a spray texture. I'm using a spray knockdown with a hopper and an air compressor, so it is going to be loud. I'm just going to spray all this area nice and symmetrical patterns. I'm going to spray each side, same direction, same speed. I'm going to hit the edges and the angles with a little more spray so I know it gets inside the angles really heavy. And then I might cross it off and go the opposite direction, or I might turn up the pressure to fill in everything. So there's no empty patterns. Pattern here, pattern there. We want everything to look the same. Basically treat your spray knockout pattern like a nice spray splatter or a heavy orange peel pattern that you're just going to knock down. Get everything sprayed out. Here I'm using a joint compound. I always use joint compounds with textures, especially sprays. I'm not going to run hot muds through my hopper and all that. The only time I would use a hot mud for spray texture, if the homeowner says I have to have this painted today, it has to be painted today, then I might use a hot mud. but I always prefer to use a thin down, creamy joint compounds for all textures. Since this is patchwork, it's not a perfect ceiling, I'm going to use a 6-inch to knock down. 6 inch is nice and straight. You can control it. I had a guy leave me a comment the other day when I was doing a 12-inch patch telling me I needed to use a 24-inch knockdown knife. The only time you use those big knockdown knives, if you're doing like whole ceiling areas, many sheets. But patchwork, trust me everybody, just use a nice straight 6-inch knife, nice and clean. You have more control over the knockdown. If you don't know how to use those big 24-inch knives, you're going to have flat spots because you're not going to be used to using such a big knife. Those big knives are used for, I can put them on an extension pole and I can reach 8-foot ceilings and I go and knock down a whole ceiling, 300 square foot ceiling or something like that. But for a patch that's 5 foot and under, whatever, just use a 6-inch knife. It makes a nice, easier pattern. You can control the knife. That way you don't have flat spots in your knockdown. It takes a little longer, but trust me, it looks better, especially if you don't handle knives every day. You're not going to be the best at a knife work. These knives are tricky to work with, so just stick to the littler knives, 6-inch. Some guys like to even knock down with a 10-inch, 8-inch, 12-inch. That's fine, but most of those bigger knives have curves in them. So you want to use a knife that doesn't have a curve. A nice straight knife, clean. I also keep a damp sponge with me so I can keep my blade clean, wipe down the edges, feather off the edges, stuff like that. But just knock it down nice and slow. Nice and slow. If this was a light knockdown, you would just let this splatter type texture set up. And then the next day maybe sand it lightly and that will give it the knockdown appearance. But this is a heavier knockdown, so I'm just knocking it down lightly with my 6-inch knife. I'm not pushing down. I'm kind of just letting the knife glide over it. And you can notice how I'm setting my knife almost touching the handles, almost touching the mud. I'm laying it flat. I'm not standing my knife up. I'm not putting no pressure on it. I'm just gliding it. It's skipping across the area. That's why you want a nice, straight, clean 6-inch knife because it just skips over the area. Once you get it all knocked down, you're just going to let this joint compound sit for at least 24 hours or more. I always recommend sanding knockdowns with 150 to 220 grit sandpaper, and then always use primers on new drywalls. The primers include PVA drywall sealer or Kills 2 latex. Always sand and always primer repairs that need to be sanded. Use 150 to 220 grit sandpaper. It just gives it a nice clean finish and knocks all the goobers out. Just makes everything perfect. But this is a voice dialogue video, kind of more step by step. Someone left me a comment saying you need to add dialogue because obviously they need to be told what to do. I thought making plenty of these videos on my channel, people would get it already now, what we're doing here. But I guess they still, after 3-4 years of making videos, they still need dialogue. So here's the same video that I already posted, but this one has dialogue. Hope you like it. Thank you.